we'll start with the achievements of Elinor Ostrom. What particularly was she studying and why?
Well, her research is very much based on empirical studies of how local natural resources, like pastures, like dams for irrigation, groundwater, woods, fish stocks, you name it. She wanted to understand how user management of those resources actually work in practice.
And that seems like a very interesting field to study. Were there any preconceptions about how these areas are managed?
Yes, and that's important because both in economics and in biology, there was this preconception that common property will always be mismanaged, and hence you have two solutions. Either you split it up, so all property is owned by individuals, or you involve the government, and you have government regulating the usage through, for example, taxes and quotas. And Elinor Ostrom, after performing her own studies and also looking at what other people were finding, she concluded that common property regimes could actually, in many cases, work better than either of the two alternatives that had been proposed.
And do you have any examples of how this works successfully?
Oh yes, there are lots and lots of examples. The challenge is to find the most striking one. So one example I like a lot is grasslands in and around Mongolia, because if you look at the satellite photos, you will see that there are some areas that are clearly green, and then you will see other areas where there's been a lot of degradation, so it looks almost brown. And then you overlay national boundaries, and then you can see that all the green is in Mongolia, whereas the yellow is in China and Russia, where they tried first collectivization, and then at least China tried also privatization. And neither of those classical solutions worked well, whereas the common property regime with mobile herders, the classic way of managing grasslands in Mongolia, worked much better from an environmental point of view. And not because they had less animals, there's the same grazing pressure overall, but the traditional methods just worked much better.
It's very interesting that tradition works better than anything that modern management comes up with. But when looking at all these examples of how this works, are there any universal rules to success?
Yes. Ostrom has identified a number of such rules. And what we find maybe most striking are the following two. First, that it matters how rules are being created. It's not just the rule itself, but how it comes to be. If the users themselves are involved in creating the rules tend to work better also. Being more legitimate, you get more compliance with the rule. Second, it also matters how the rules are being monitored and how sanctions are being put into place. Systems work better when users themselves engage in monitoring and also when they engage in sanctioning of free riders.
So when they have a vested interest in what they're doing?
Yes, yes. So having third parties from the outside coming in to do the management does not tend to work as well as when the users themselves are actively engaged.
You briefly mentioned a limitation there. Are there any more limitations to this sort of model?
You mean to...
In which ways may it not work so well?
Well, this is... surely there are, but these are the ones that we think are most striking, most surprising.
And so you've mentioned an example, a very nice example of success at sort of nationwide level or a quite restricted level. Is this something that can be scaled up? Is there? We talk about common community ideals, but can we expand that to common global ideals? So, for example, with the issues with climate change.
Yes. So this is one of the questions that I know that Elinor Ostrom has been much involved with over the last decade or so. So what we know that we can learn from her work is that you can often scale up from two small communities. They can start cooperating once each of them works well internally. How you can scale it up globally is not absolutely obvious to me, or I think to her. But one guess would be that with all the modern communication technology, some of the tricks that work well in small groups could also work well globally. I think of naming and shaming, for example. With today's technology, something stupid that you do in Stockholm will be known worldwide after just a couple of hours.
Yes, indeed.